Dan Bilzerian called out the hypocrisy and double standards when it comes to dehumanizing Muslims, whilst not holding people from other faiths to the same standard, despite their actions often being far worse. In particular, he made reference to Bill Maher and Piers Morgan.
Dehumanizing populations, which is what we did with Muslims in Iraq. I was in the military. Like, I saw what happens, and you can justify all sorts of super up things, and that's what they're doing in Israel right now. I don't like that Bill Maher can get on national television and say that Islam is the mother lode of bad ideas. Like, it's just bullshit. They can massively criticize Islam. You should be able to massively criticize Judaism. It should be freedom of speech. There's a big double standard here, and that's what I don't like. We're basically pissing off a quarter of the globe, the Muslims. I think it's important to speak up for these Palestinians that are being killed right now because they don't really have a voice. I don't like my tax dollars funding their suffering and their genocide, and Israel cutting off food and water to mostly civilians and bombing hospitals and blowing up schools, basically infringing on these people's human rights on a daily basis. Jewish supremacy is the greatest threat at the world today, and I said that on national TV. I've said that on my social platforms. They've labeled me an anti-Semite. I don't give a shit what people say about me. And I said this on Piers Morgan. I don't believe in white supremacy. I don't believe in Jewish supremacy. I don't believe in supremacy, period. And they persecuted these Palestinians. They stole their land, and it's super up, and they're currently operating in apartheid. And I'm completely against that, and I'm not going to apologize for that. If you start looking at the history of what these assholes have done, it's inexcusable.
As Dan pointed out, America's funding of Israel isn't just a costly investment that yields no returns. It also alienates a quarter of the world's population, namely Muslims. And when you factor in non-Muslims who also oppose the US footing the bill for Israel's endless wars, that number likely rises to around 3/4 of the global population objecting to the monetization of war crimes. Also, well done to him for calling out the decades-old discrimination and dehumanization of Muslims, a sinister tactic Dan himself said is used to justify the mistreatment and oppression of innocent people through falsely generalizing them all as villains. Dan made a great point when he said that bigots like Bill Maher are given free rein on mainstream platforms to spread vile anti-Muslim views, while the same platforms would swiftly cancel anyone expressing similar hatred towards Judaism. I agree with Dan, this is a blatant double standard, and the people in charge of these platforms are clearly complicit in a calculated, malicious and prejudiced political strategy. I respect Dan for giving a voice to the Iraqis and Palestinians that have suffered as a result of these malignant totalitarian agendas. Dan Bilzerian made it explicitly clear that opposing Jewish supremacy does not equate to anti-Semitism. Piers Morgan certainly played a significant role in Dan Bilzerian being labelled as anti-Semitic, given how Piers continues to portray Dan after their viral interview, despite Dan clearly stating on that show that he is not anti-Semitic. I would argue that Piers Morgan's former pro-Israel stance has caused far more harm than the views expressed by Dan Bilzerian. Anyone who continues to make excuses for Israel by promoting their anti-Muslim, anti-Palestinian and genocidal propaganda is complicit and should be held accountable, as they're playing a direct role in enabling the killing of innocent civilians and children.